When we think of the British monarchy, most of us imagine glittering crowns, golden thrones, and palaces gleaming under the weight of history. The royal family is often portrayed as the very definition of elegance, dignity, and tradition. For centuries, the monarchy has sold itself as something almost divine, rulers chosen by God, standing above the rest of humanity. But behind that mask of majesty lies a truth far more complicated and far darker than most of us realize. The crown is not just a piece of gold, it is a mask, a carefully polished symbol designed to dazzle the world, while concealing centuries of betrayal, scandal, and bloodshed. Every smile we see on the balcony of Buckingham Palace hides the echoes of screams from the past. Every royal wedding broadcast as a fairy tale is built upon foundations of broken vows and secret affairs, and every public ceremony that celebrates loyalty to the monarch quietly erases the violent history of how that loyalty was once forced. The monarchy has always relied on performance. Kings and queens were never just rulers. They were actors on the stage of history. Their robes, their jewels, their carefully rehearsed speeches, all crafted to inspire awe and obedience. But as we peel back the layers, what we find is not divine purity, but human ambition, fear, lust, and a relentless hunger for power. Take, for example, the image of the perfect family the modern monarchy projects today. Smiling portraits, carefully curated interviews. But look closer, and you'll find a cycle of scandal repeating itself through the centuries. Affairs that shook entire kingdoms, brothers who betrayed brothers, queens who plotted in silence, wielding influence behind closed doors. These are not the polished faces we see on stamps and coins. They are the hidden realities behind the throne. The mask of majesty has always served one purpose: survival. Because beneath the glamour, the monarchy has always been fragile, threatened by rivals, by uprisings, by secrets too dangerous to reveal. At every turn, the crown has had to reinvent itself, hiding its weaknesses behind an image of eternal strength. The illusion was their greatest weapon, but also their greatest lie. And here's the unsettling truth: the British monarchy as we know it might never have survived without this mask. Without the glitter and ceremony to distract the people, the scandals would have destroyed them long ago. Imagine if the public truly knew the secrets buried under the palace floorboards, the bloodlines that are not as pure as they claim. The wars started not out of duty, but out of personal ambition. The heirs who mysteriously disappeared, leaving questions that were never answered. Yet, that mask is starting to crack. With every generation, more of the truth slips out. Historians dig deeper. Old letters and diaries reveal the thoughts the monarchs never wanted exposed. The internet spreads stories once hidden behind palace walls, and we begin to see the monarchy not as an untouchable symbol, but as a family, flawed, divided, and often ruthless. The question is, if the mask has been hiding the truth for centuries, what really lies beneath? And how far back do these shadows stretch? To uncover that, we must journey to the very origins of royal power, back to a time when the throne was not draped in ceremony and respectability, but dripping in blood. Back to the dark foundations that built the British crown. Before the crown glittered with diamonds, before the monarchy wrapped itself in ceremony and pageantry, it was built with something far more primitive. The throne of England was never passed down gently. It was seized, stolen, and drenched in violence. Every crown placed on a king's head carried the weight of bodies buried to secure it. In the early centuries, power did not come from divine right or noble destiny. It came from the sword. The very idea of monarchy in Britain was born in chaos. Tribes battling for dominance, kings murdered in their own halls, heirs eliminated before they could grow strong. There was nothing romantic about these beginnings. They were soaked in betrayal, ambition, and war. Take William the Conqueror. His victory in 1066 is often celebrated as the start of a glorious new chapter in English history. But behind that conquest was devastation. Villages burned, thousands slaughtered, entire regions starved into submission. William's crown was forged from fire and fear, not destiny, and yet history books softened the story, calling him the conqueror instead of the butcher. The truth is simple: the throne he won came at the cost of rivers of blood. And it didn't stop there. Successors fought tooth and nail to keep their grip on power. Brothers turned against brothers. Sons rebelled against fathers. Mothers plotted against their own children. The crown was a prize so tempting that no family bond, no oath, no sacred vow was strong enough to withstand it. Every coronation was shadowed by suspicion. Who had to die for that crown to be worn? Who whispered in the dark to make sure rivals vanished? Consider the War of the Roses, a brutal civil war that tore England apart. Families divided, children forced to take sides, kings dragged from thrones and executed. For 3 decades, England bled as rival branches of the same royal family slaughtered each other in the name of legitimacy. The roses were symbols, yes, but behind them was a battlefield littered with bodies, a kingdom so fractured that ordinary people paid the price for royal ambition. This is the true foundation of the monarchy, not fairy tales of divine right, not noble destiny, but raw survival. The British throne was not inherited with grace. It was clawed, fought and stolen through centuries of violence. Every jewel in the crown is a reminder of blood spilled to protect it. And yet the monarchy never presented itself this way. From the very beginning, kings and queens wrapped their brutality in the language of God. They claimed divine approval for their victories. They said their enemies were rebels not against the crown, but against heaven itself. This was their genius, to turn bloodshed into destiny, murder into divine justice. The people were told not to see ambition but God's will, and the mask of majesty began to take shape. But here's the haunting truth: blood never truly washes away. The throne we see today still carries the shadows of those violent beginnings. Every polished royal procession walks on the ghosts of those who fell to secure it. Every golden coronation whispers the names of the forgotten dead. So if the throne was built on blood, what came next? Betrayal. The kind that doesn't just shake kingdoms but rewrites history itself. Because once the crown was secured, the deadliest threats no longer came from outside. They came from within the royal family itself. If blood built the throne, betrayal kept it alive. And nowhere was that betrayal more ruthless than within the royal family itself. Forget enemies across the sea. The deadliest threats to the British monarchy came from its own brothers, sisters, and children. The crown was more than a symbol. It was survival, wealth, and the power to command armies. And in a world where bloodlines determined destiny, every sibling was both an ally and a rival. Behind the walls of castles, royal families lived in a state of constant suspicion. Smiles at feasts, masked schemes, whispered in the dark, and at any moment, a brother could become a usurper, a sister a conspirator, a son a traitor. Look at King Richard the Lionheart and his brother John. To the world, Richard was the crusading king, brave and noble. But while he fought abroad, John plotted at home. Letters of treachery, bribes to nobles, schemes to seize power. John's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was national. His hunger for the throne nearly shattered the kingdom. When Richard returned, he didn't just fight foreign enemies, he had to fight the shadows cast by his own blood. But perhaps the most chilling tale is that of the princes in the Tower. 2 young boys, Edward V and his brother Richard, heirs to the throne, locked away in the Tower of London by their uncle Richard III. The boys vanished, never to be seen again. Officially, their fate remains a mystery, but history whispers one answer: that Richard had them murdered to secure the crown for himself. 2 children erased, their blood sacrificed on the altar of ambition. It was betrayal at its most unforgivable. Family turned executioner. And betrayal didn't just come in the form of murder. Sometimes it was emotional, personal, cutting deeper than any blade. Henry VIII's court was poisoned with suspicion. His wives accused, executed, and discarded in the name of heirs and power. Brothers and sisters lived in fear, knowing that a single whisper could send them to the scaffold. Even children were pawns in a brutal game, manipulated to strengthen one faction while destroying another. What makes these betrayals even more haunting is how they shaped the nation. Wars of succession, rebellions, even changes in law and religion, all born from family feuds. England wasn't just ruled by kings and queens. It was ruled by rivalries, by betrayals whispered over feasts and sealed in blood. The monarchy wasn't a family united under God. It was a family at war with itself. And yet, through the chaos, the crown endured. Betrayals were buried under layers of ceremony. Scandals erased from official history. The mask of majesty grew thicker, hiding the fractures that could have destroyed everything. The monarchy survived, but it was changed forever, more secretive, more ruthless, more determined to protect its image at any cost. But betrayal inside the family wasn't the monarchy's only weapon or weakness. To truly hold power, the crown needed more than blood. It needed a partner, a force just as powerful, just as feared, to legitimize its rule. And so, the monarchy turned to the one institution that could sanctify its ambition, the church. Power alone was never enough to keep the throne secure. Kings could command armies, but armies could be defeated. Queens could demand loyalty, but loyalty could be bought or broken. What the monarchy needed was something stronger than swords, something that bound people not just in body but in spirit. And so they reached for the church. From the very beginning, the crown and the cross walked hand in hand. Monarchs claimed their authority was not human but divine. Coronations weren't just political ceremonies, they were holy rituals. The archbishop anointed the king with sacred oil, as if God himself had chosen the ruler. To question the monarch was not just treason against the state, it was blasphemy against heaven. This alliance gave the monarchy its most powerful weapon, fear, because when politics failed, religion filled the gaps. Wars became crusades, rebellions became heresies. Enemies weren't just rivals, they were enemies of God. And the people were taught that obedience to the crown was obedience to heaven itself. But this so-called holy partnership was never pure. It was an unholy alliance, forged in manipulation and control. The church gained wealth, land and influence, while the monarchy gained legitimacy. Together they crafted a system that silenced dissent and punished rebellion with eternal damnation. It was power disguised as piety. Take Henry VIII. His break with Rome wasn't about faith, it was about control. When the Pope refused to grant him a divorce, Henry ripped England away from the Catholic Church and made himself head of the new Church of England. Overnight he seized church lands, filled his coffers, and placed himself not just as king, but as God's representative on earth. The people were forced to bow, not just to a crown, but to a man who claimed heaven itself stood behind him. The unholy alliance continued for centuries. Monarchs used sermons to justify wars, bishops to spy on their enemies, and church law to crush those who dared to resist. People who opposed the monarchy weren't just rebels, they were branded sinners, burned at the stake, executed for heresy, damned both in life and in memory. The church gave the monarchy the one thing no sword could ever deliver: absolute authority over the soul. And yet, behind the pious words and holy rituals, the monarchy was anything but godly. Kings drank, lusted, betrayed, and murdered, all while claiming divine right. Queens plotted and schemed, draped in holy robes. The church turned a blind eye because the crown filled its treasury and protected its power. Together they built a prison of obedience so strong that most people never even saw the chains. But chains always crack. The same alliance that held the monarchy in power also bred hypocrisy, scandals of priests, corruption of bishops, monarchs who broke every law they enforced. All of it whispered through the streets. The people began to see the cracks in the mask, and once they questioned the church, it was only a matter of time before they questioned the crown. Still, for the monarchy, the alliance had done its work. By cloaking its power in holiness, the crown survived scandals that might have destroyed it. But holiness could not hide everything. There were secrets too scandalous, too human, too shameful to be erased by prayer. And those secrets lived not in the pulpit but in the royal bedchamber. If the church cloaked the monarchy in holiness, the royal bedchamber stripped that illusion bare, behind the walls of castles and palaces, far from the watchful eyes of priests and the adoring gaze of subjects. Kings and queens were not saints. They were human, and their desires, their passions, and their forbidden loves ignited scandals that shook kingdom. Marriage for royals was never about love. It was about alliances, treaties, and power. A king's bride was chosen to secure borders, strengthen bloodlines, or silence enemies. Queens were wed not for their happiness, but for their wombs. But what happens when the human heart refuses to obey? When kings and queens longed for something beyond duty, something reckless, something dangerous, history is littered with affairs that stained the monarchy's golden mask. Henry VIII's obsession with Anne Boleyn didn't just end a marriage, it ended a religion. His desperate pursuit of passion split England from Rome, sent thousands to their deaths, and birthed the Church of England. What began as a king's desire for a woman reshaped an entire nation. Charles II filled his court with mistresses, fathering dozens of illegitimate children, while the Queen remained childless. His dalliances were whispered about in every tavern and mocked in pamphlets that spread like wildfire. Yet, rather than weaken his image, Charles leaned into it. He was called the Merry Monarch, his scandals dressed as charm. But behind the laughter, the crown grew heavier with the whispers of betrayal. Even queens were not immune to scandal. Queen Caroline, wife of George I, was publicly humiliated, accused of affairs, dragged through a divorce trial that captivated the nation. Crowds jeered at the king and rallied behind her, exposing just how fragile the monarchy's image could be when passion spilled into the public eye. But perhaps the most dangerous scandals were those whispered in silence, never openly acknowledged but never fully erased. Secret affairs, hidden children, loves forbidden by class, religion, or gender. Letters burned, diaries destroyed, servants sworn to secrecy. The monarchy fought desperately to keep these truths hidden, for they threatened not just reputations, but the very legitimacy of the bloodline. And here lies the heart of the scandal. The crown's greatest weapon was always the illusion of purity, the idea that the royal bloodline was unbroken, chosen, untarnished. But every affair, every secret child, every broken vow cracked that illusion. Because if the bloodline was not pure, then what gave the monarchy the right to rule? These scandals were not just private matters. They shaped politics, toppled alliances, and sparked wars. A kiss in the wrong chamber could cost thousands of lives. A whispered rumor of an illegitimate heir could ignite civil war. In the royal family, passion was never personal. It was political dynamite. And yet for all the secrecy, the stories lived on. In ballads, in letters, in the quiet gossip of courtiers. The monarchy could silence some, but not all. These scandals became the heartbeat of history, the hidden rhythm beneath the pomp and ceremony. But passion was only one fire threatening the crown. The other came from open battle, because when bloodlines were questioned, when rival claims emerged, the monarchy did not just whisper, it went to war, and those wars would drown England in centuries. If passion tore the monarchy apart in whispers, bloodlines ripped it open in war. Every crown was a prize, and every royal with even the faintest claim to it became both a potential king and a potential enemy. The throne was not just a seat of power, it was a battlefield. And when rivals rose, England bled. The Wars of the Roses remain one of the most brutal reminders of this truth. Two branches of the same royal family, the House of Lancaster and the House of York, locked the kingdom in 3 decades of civil war. Brothers fought brothers, fathers turned on sons, children became pawns in a struggle they barely understood. Castles burned, villages starved, and the soil of England ran red with the blood of its people, all in the name of a crown. Imagine the fear of living in that time. Allegiances shifted overnight. One week your lord was loyal to York, the next he swore allegiance to Lancaster. Families destroyed themselves trying to survive a war that was never theirs. And all the while, the royal family's hunger for legitimacy drove the slaughter forward. The end of that war brought Henry Tudor to the throne, uniting the Rosies under one crown. But peace was an illusion. Every victory left behind ghosts. Every rival line, not completely destroyed, remained a threat. And so, the monarchy turned to paranoia. Suspected heirs were imprisoned, sometimes executed. Their blood spilled in silence so the crown could sleep more easily at night. But the Wars of the Roses were only one chapter in a much larger story. The English Civil War in the 17th century pitted king against parliament, tearing apart not just families but the nation itself. For the first time, a king, Charles I, was not just defeated, but executed, his head severed, his crown shattered, his blood spilling into the snow before a stunned crowd. It was proof that even monarchs could fall, and that the throne was never truly secure. And still the wars didn't end. Battles of succession echoed across centuries. Mary, Queen of Scots, executed by her cousin Elizabeth I, both bound by blood and divided by ambition. James II ousted by his own daughter and her husband in the so-called Glorious Revolution. Each moment dressed up as politics, but at its heart was the same story: family, power, betrayal and blood. For ordinary people, these wars of thrones were not about dynasties or destiny. They were about survival. Crops burned, taxes rose, children conscripted. The monarchy's struggle for legitimacy was paid for by the suffering of the common man. Every royal ambition had a human cost. And yet, through every war, through every spilled drop of blood, the monarchy endured. The throne was never left empty for long, because behind every fallen king, another claimant waited in the shadows, ready to seize the mask of majesty and wear it anew. But wars alone couldn't protect the monarchy. To survive, it needed more than swords and heirs. It needed silence. It needed to control the stories that people told, to erase the names of rivals, to bury the truth of secret heirs who might rise and claim their place. If war was the monarchy's battlefield, succession was its shadow war. The crown was never simply inherited. It was maneuvered, manipulated, and sometimes stolen. Behind the pomp of coronations lay a far darker truth. Every king or queen who rose did so on the silence of others. Rivals buried, heirs erased, claims extinguished before they could ignite rebellion. From the moment a monarch died, chaos waited at the edges. Who would wear the crown? Whose blood was pure enough, strong enough, legitimate enough? And in a system where legitimacy meant everything, one rumor could be lethal: a whispered word that a child was illegitimate, a doubt cast on a marriage, a letter suggesting another had a better claim. These were enough to unravel dynasties. Take Edward VI, the boy king. He was only 12 when he and his younger brother were locked in the Tower of London by their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Promised protection, they vanished instead. History remembers them as the princes in the Tower, their disappearance one of England's darkest mysteries. Did Richard have them killed to clear his path to the throne? Most believe so, but the truth remains shrouded in silence. What is clear is that 2 children stood in the way of a crown, and 2 children disappeared. Henry VII, the first Tudor, wore his crown with the constant shadow of pretenders. The most famous was Perkin Warbeck, a man who claimed to be Richard, one of those lost princes. For years he stirred rebellion across Europe, gaining support from foreign courts. Henry could never rest, for if Warbeck truly was a prince, then the Tudor crown was a lie. When Warbeck was finally captured, Henry had him hanged, not for who he was, but for what he represented: the dangerous power of doubt. Even centuries later, succession remained a minefield. Elizabeth I faced endless plots by supporters of her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary's existence alone was a threat. She was Catholic, a mother, and had a stronger claim to the throne in the eyes of many. Elizabeth's advisors begged her to act. In the end, Elizabeth signed the death warrant, sending her cousin to the executioner's block. It was not just family betrayal, it was political necessity, because as long as Mary lived, Elizabeth's crown was never safe. The monarchy learned that heirs must be controlled, rivals must be silenced, and bloodlines must be carefully curated. Not every royal child was celebrated. Some were hidden away, declared illegitimate, or erased from records. Bastards of kings, even if beloved, could never be allowed to threaten the pure line of succession, so they were paid off, locked away, or left to fade into history's margins. But silence was fragile. Every erased name, every hushed scandal, left behind questions. What if the wrong heir was crowned? What if the rightful bloodline had been destroyed in secret? These doubts festered in the minds of subjects, fueling rebellions, uprisings, and endless suspicion. Succession was not just about keeping the crown safe. It was about controlling the story. The monarchy's greatest weapon was not the sword, but narrative. And whoever controlled the story controlled the crown. Yet even the most carefully guarded succession could not withstand what came next. Because sometimes the threat was not from within the bloodline, but from outside it, from foreign powers who sought to control England's throne by marriage, invasion, or manipulation. And when the crown became the prize in a global game, the monarchy faced enemies far beyond its borders. If hidden heirs haunted the monarchy from within, foreign powers stalked it from without. The English crown was never just an English prize. It was a pawn in a vast and dangerous game played by empires, popes, and rival kings. To hold the throne was to hold influence over Europe itself, and that meant enemies lurked far beyond the kingdom's shores. Marriage was the most common weapon. A royal wedding was never about romance. It was a treaty wrapped in silk. Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was not chosen for love. She was the daughter of the powerful Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, a union meant to bind England to Spain. But when Henry cast her aside for Anne Boleyn, he did not just break a marriage, he broke with Europe's most powerful Catholic empire. The fallout pushed England into isolation, excommunication, and wars that echoed for generations. Foreign influence did not always arrive with crowns and rings. Sometimes it came with armies. The Spanish Armada, launched in 1588, was not just an invasion, it was an attempt to crush Elizabeth I's Protestant reign and restore Catholic dominance to England. For weeks, the kingdom braced for annihilation. When storms scattered the Armada and England claimed victory, it was more than survival. It was proof that the monarchy's fate was tied to forces greater than itself, weather, chance, and faith. But not all battles were fought on seas and fields. Many were waged in shadows. Spies moved like ghosts through Europe, passing secrets in coded letters, plotting assassinations, bribing courtiers. Elizabeth I relied on a vast intelligence network, led by Sir Francis Walsingham, to protect her, without his spies uncovering Catholic plots backed by Spain and Rome. Elizabeth might have met the same fate as Mary, Queen of Scots. Even centuries later, foreign influence never loosened its grip. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Britain's royal family tangled itself deeper into Europe through marriages, becoming a web of alliances that stretched across the continent. Queen Victoria, called the grandmother of Europe, married her children into nearly every royal house. The aim was stability, but the result was entanglement. When World War I erupted, it was a family feud on a continental scale. Cousins ruling England, Germany, and Russia found themselves at war with one another, their blood ties powerless against national rivalries. For the British monarchy, foreign influence was a double-edged sword. It could secure peace, but it could also chain the crown to the ambitions of others. A monarch could become less a sovereign and more a pawn, their choices bound by treaties and threats from beyond their borders. And yet, the crown survived. It bent, but it did not break. Foreign enemies could wound it, weaken it, but never destroy it completely. That resilience was born not from the strength of armies alone, but from something more insidious, the monarchy's mastery of image, its ability to adapt, to rebrand, to transform itself into whatever the world needed it to be. Because if foreign powers sought to control the throne, the monarchy learned to control perception, to wield not just armies and alliances, but propaganda, and that weapon would become its greatest shield. If foreign armies threatened the monarchy from outside, propaganda became its weapon from within. No throne can stand on force alone. To survive centuries of scandal, war, and betrayal, the British monarchy mastered the art of illusion, creating a mask so powerful that it turned flawed humans into untouchable legends. Take Elizabeth I. She was not just a queen, she was a carefully constructed image. The Virgin Queen, a title as much propaganda as truth, painted her as married not to any man, but to England itself. Her portraits showed her ageless, flawless, draped in symbols of purity and divine right. Behind the mask stood a woman constantly under threat, surrounded by plots and doubts. Yet through the power of image, she became eternal, a monarch who could command loyalty not just with armies, but with belief. Centuries later, Queen Victoria used the same weapon. In reality, her reign was marked by poverty, unrest, and empire built on blood. But the image crafted for her was that of the grieving widow, the devoted mother of 9, the embodiment of stability in a turbulent age. Her face, stamped on coins and hung in schools, became the face of Britain itself. By turning her private sorrow into public strength, propaganda transformed her into an icon of national unity. Even in the 20th century, when monarchy seemed outdated, image saved it again. During World War II, King George VI, a man plagued by a severe stammer, stood as a symbol of courage. Radio speeches, carefully written and rehearsed, carried his hesitant but determined voice into homes across Britain. His struggles made him human, but propaganda made him heroic, the king who gave his people hope under the bombs of the Blitz. But propaganda did not just glorify, it concealed, it erased. The monarchy learned to hide its sins beneath polished portraits and choreographed ceremonies. Scandals that might have destroyed lesser dynasties were smothered under the weight of pageantry, affairs, illegitimate children, secret deals. All could be disguised if the crown dazzled the people with enough spectacle. And this is the true genius of the monarchy. Its survival has depended less on swords or laws, and more on stories. Myths crafted, legends spun, images painted so brightly that they blinded the world to the shadows behind them. Yet every mask has cracks, every illusion can be broken. And in the modern age of cameras, tabloids, and endless scrutiny, propaganda is no longer enough. The mask slips. The carefully crafted images begin to shatter, and what is revealed threatens to undo centuries of control. Because the greatest danger to the monarchy no longer comes from foreign invaders or rebellious nobles. It comes from within, from the scandals the crown can no longer hide. For centuries, the monarchy's survival depended on one great myth, the illusion of purity. The crown was not just a symbol of power, it was supposed to be sacred. Royal blood was presented as different, higher, chosen by God. But when you strip away the legends, when you peel back the centuries of pageantry, the truth is scandalous. The royal bloodline is anything but pure. Take Henry VIII, for instance. He wasn't just the king with 6 wives. He was a man obsessed with producing a male heir to continue his line. That obsession led to broken marriages, beheadings, and a religious revolution that tore England away from Rome. The supposed purity of his bloodline came at the cost of women's lives, their bodies sacrificed to his desperation for legacy. But Henry wasn't unique. Across generations, kings and queens hid affairs, produced illegitimate children, and rewrote family trees to protect the crown's image. Entire lines of succession were built on secrets, whispered in dark corridors. In truth, many heirs may have carried blood that was anything but royal. The crown was less about sacred inheritance, more about ruthless survival. Even the Tudor dynasty, so celebrated in history, began with scandal. Henry VII's claim to the throne was shaky at best, won more through the sword than by birthright. Yet once in power, he carefully rewrote the story, painting his line as destined, chosen, inevitable. The mask of purity was not inherited, it was manufactured. Fast forward to the House of Windsor, and the illusion only grew more fragile. Edward VIII's abdication in 1936 shattered the image of royal duty. He was a king who gave up the throne for love, a story spun into romance, but one that revealed how human weakness could destroy the sacred order of succession. And behind the fairy tale lay darker truths. Edward's shocking sympathies with Nazi Germany, secrets buried quickly to protect the monarchy's survival. The modern royal family has been no stranger to scandal either. The world remembers Princess Diana, adored as the people's princess, who exposed the cracks in the fairy tale marriage to Prince Charles. Her confessions of betrayal and heartbreak revealed a truth long hidden. Even the most glamorous royal unions were built not on love, but on cold duty. The crown demanded heirs, not happiness. And now, in the age of cameras and tabloids, every crack in the bloodline is magnified. Prince Harry's decision to step back from royal duties, Prince Andrew's scandal with Jeffrey Epstein. These are not just personal controversies. They strike at the very illusion that the monarchy depends on, that the family wearing the crown is somehow above the rest of us. Because once the myth of purity crumbles, what is left? If the crown is not sacred, if the blood is not pure, then the monarchy is nothing more than a dynasty of humans clinging to power. And once people begin to see that truth, the question arises, why should such a system survive at all? But the monarchy has always known how to adapt, how to twist even scandal into survival. And that brings us to the final secret, the crown's ability not just to endure history, but to control it. The true power of the monarchy has never been in its bloodlines or its armies. Its greatest weapon has always been control. Not the kind forged with chains and prisons, but the quiet, invisible control of minds, beliefs, and loyalty. To understand how the crown survived scandal, you must understand how it mastered the art of shaping its people. From the very beginning, monarchs cloaked themselves in divinity. Kings and queens were not just rulers, they were chosen by God. To question the crown was to question heaven itself. This idea, known as the divine right of kings, turned obedience into faith. Subjects did not simply fear the monarch, they worshipped them. It was a masterstroke of control, binding hearts as tightly as any law ever could. But the control went further. Ceremonies, pageantry and ritual transformed rulers into something more than human. Coronations in Westminster Abbey were not just political acts, they were sacred theatre. Every jewel on the crown, every note of the choir, every ancient oath was designed to dazzle the people into belief, to make the monarch appear eternal, unshakable, inevitable. Even language became a weapon. Royal proclamations and speeches framed every war as noble, every tax as duty, every sacrifice as honor. And when doubt arose, the monarchy turned to fear. Rebels were branded traitors, executed as warnings to anyone who dared to whisper against the throne. Generations learned, not just to obey, but to accept obedience as natural. This control was not limited to England. As the empire spread, so did the image of the crown. Portraits of monarchs hung in colonial offices, schools and courts. Coins, stamped with royal faces, passed through millions of hands. Everywhere the empire reached, the crown's image reminded people who ruled them, even from thousands of miles away. But perhaps the most cunning form of control was psychological. The monarchy learned to weave itself into people's sense of identity. For king and country was not just a slogan, it was a call to give your life willingly, as if dying for the crown was the highest honor. Soldiers marched into wars believing they fought for something greater than themselves. Families sent sons to die believing it was noble sacrifice, not exploitation. And yet, the control was never complete. Every generation brought whispers, rebellions, cracks in the mask. The monarchy's survival depended on silencing these voices, rewriting stories, and burying inconvenient truths, which leads us to the ultimate cost of royal power. The price paid not by the kings and queens, but by those who lived and died under their shadow. Every crown shines brightest under the weight of sacrifice. But what history often forgets is who truly paid the price for royal power. Not the kings and queens draped in silk and jewels, but the nameless millions who lived and died in their shadow. Think of the peasants who starved while palaces overflowed with gold. Entire villages worked their lives away, not for themselves, but to fund wars, ceremonies, and the endless appetite of the crown. They bled in the fields, so that monarchs could dine on silver plates. They lived in silence, so that kings and queens could live in glory. Think of the soldiers sent to die in foreign lands. Men who marched into France, Scotland and beyond, told they fought for honor, when in truth they fought for dynasties. Their bodies littered the soil of Europe, so that royal bloodlines could remain unbroken. Their deaths were not sacrifices freely chosen. They were demands written in the name of loyalty. And then there were the colonies, India, Africa, the Caribbean, lands stripped of wealth, people stripped of freedom, all under the banner of empire. For centuries, monarchs wore crowns encrusted with jewels, mined from foreign soil, paraded in garments bought with the suffering of millions. Behind every diamond in the royal collection lies a history of conquest, slavery and pain. The Koh-i-Noor diamond, still displayed proudly today, is not just a gem, it is a reminder of empire's theft, a wound that never truly healed. Even within Britain itself, the price was heavy. Generations of women sacrificed for heirs they did not choose to bear. Generations of men sacrificed for wars they did not start. And generations of commoners told their suffering was noble because it kept the crown secure. But here is the truth. The monarchy does not want remembered. Its survival has never been free. Every page of royal history is written in the ink of human lives. Behind the pageantry and power lies a debt that can never be repaid. And now in the modern world, the question grows louder. Why does this system still exist? Why, in an age of democracy and equality, does a family still rule not by merit, but by birthright? Why do we still bow to crowns when we know the cost they demanded from those before us? Because history is not just about remembering victories, it is about remembering the hidden costs. The stories buried, the voices silenced, the lives taken to uphold an illusion. So the next time you see the crown glinting in the light of ceremony, remember the shadows it casts. Remember the peasants, the soldiers, the colonies, the forgotten women. Remember that power is never free. Someone always pays the price. And in the story of the British monarchy, that price has been nothing less than the suffering of countless souls sacrificed on the altar of survival. History remembers crowns and castles, but behind the glitter lies a story of blood, betrayal, and silence. The British monarchy has survived 1,000 years, not because it was pure, but because it was ruthless. It has thrived on illusion, control, and sacrifice. And while the pageantry dazzles, the truth whispers beneath it. A truth of lives taken, voices silenced, and generations bound to a throne they never chose. So the question now is not just about history, it's about us. In an age where truth is finally being uncovered, do we still allow the crown to stand unchallenged? Or do we pull back the mask and see it for what it truly is? If this story opened your eyes to the hidden cost of monarchy, don't let it end here. Like this video, so more people can uncover the truth. Subscribe for more untold histories that reveal the shadows behind the glory. And share your thoughts in the comments. What shocked you most about the crown's survival? Because history isn't just about the kings who wore the crown, it's about the people who paid for it. And remembering them is how we finally tell the full story.